In a small town tucked away in the Philippines, Marco Aguilar grew up surrounded by the sound of guitars and the whisper of memories he never truly understood. His mother, Liza, used to hum old folk songs as she cooked rice over a wooden stove, her eyes soft but distant. Marco didn't know why, but every time she sang, Anak, a deep sadness lingered in her face. He loved that song, even though he didn't know that it was written by the man whose blood ran in his veins. Freddie Aguilar, a name known across the Philippines, a legend, a symbol of heartfelt storytelling through music. For years, Liza had hidden the truth from Marco, fearing that his father's fame would cast too long a shadow over the quiet, simple life they had built. Marco's world was humble. He worked in a small repair shop fixing old radios and guitars, saving whatever coins he could to help his mother. Every night, after work, he carried his weathered guitar to a nearby street corner where he sang to whoever stopped to listen, sometimes to a small crowd, sometimes to no one at all. His voice carried both pain and beauty, a reflection of the life he lived. The children from the neighborhood would call him the boy with the golden voice, but Marco just smiled and said, "It's just my heart talking." He never realized how close the truth really was. One night, while performing a soft ballad under a flickering streetlight, a man stopped to listen. He was a local talent scout named Ramon, who had discovered a few singers for reality shows in Manila. After Marco finished, Ramon approached and said, "Kid, you sound like Freddie Aguilar. Ever heard of him?" Marco laughed shyly. "Yeah, my mom used to play his songs. He's a legend." Ramon nodded. "You've got something rare, the kind of voice that tells a story. You should audition for Philippines Got Talent." Marco chuckled, thinking it was just another empty compliment. But later that night, he found an old letter hidden in his mother's drawer while looking for paper to write lyrics. It was addressed to Liza from Freddie Aguilar himself, written decades ago. The letter spoke of regret, love, and a promise to one day meet the son he never got to hold. Marco froze. His hands shook as he read the signature, Freddie Aguilar. He sat there for hours, his heart pounding, his mind racing with disbelief and questions. When his mother found him holding the letter, tears filled her eyes. "I wanted to tell you when the time was right," she whispered. "But I didn't want you to chase his name. I wanted you to find your own." Marco stared at her, still reeling. "So, I'm his son." She nodded, silently crying. In that moment, Marco felt both proud and lost. A part of him wanted to forget, but another part wanted to sing louder than ever before. That night, he promised himself he'd step on a stage not as Freddie's son, but as Marco, the boy who found his voice through truth. Days later, Marco packed a small bag, his guitar, and a heart full of dreams. He took a cheap bus to Manila, staring out the window as the countryside passed by. The city felt enormous when he arrived, towering buildings, endless noise, and strangers rushing everywhere. He was overwhelmed but determined. He found the audition venue for Philippines Got Talent, and filled out the form carefully. When he reached the line that asked for last name, he hesitated. Should he write Aguilar or Santos? He chose Santos, deciding he wanted to prove himself without his father's shadow. Inside the waiting area, contestants laughed and practiced. Marco sat quietly in a corner, tuning his guitar. A few performers mocked him for being too simple, dressed in old jeans and a worn-out shirt. But when he softly sang a few lines of Anak to calm his nerves, the room went silent. One of the dancers whispered, "That voice, it sounds like Freddie Aguilar." Marco didn't respond. He looked down at his guitar and smiled gently. He wasn't here to chase fame or a name, he was here to tell his story. As his number was called, he stood up, took a deep breath, and walked toward the stage lights, ready to face the world for the first time as himself. When Marco stepped onto the Philippines Got Talent stage, the bright lights nearly blinded him. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his guitar, the instrument that had been his only friend for most of his life. The audience murmured softly, unsure what to expect from the shy young man in plain clothes. One of the judges smiled kindly and asked for his name. "Marco Santos," he replied quietly. Simon Cowell, who was guest judging that season, leaned forward with interest. "What are you going to sing for us today?" Marco hesitated, glancing down at the old guitar, then said, "A song that means everything to me, Anak." The judges nodded, unaware that the song's composer was the man who had unknowingly given this young performer life. As soon as Marco strummed the first chord, a hush fell over the crowd. His voice was soft at first, trembling with nerves, but as he continued, something remarkable happened. Every note came from deep within his soul, carrying years of longing, pain, and love. His tone was raw, haunting, and almost identical to Freddie Aguilar's, yet filled with something new, a young heart rediscovering an old truth. Simon's expression changed from polite curiosity to utter disbelief. His eyes widened as Marco's voice soared through the final chorus, his emotion spilling into every word. When the song ended, the entire theater erupted. The audience jumped to their feet, cheering and clapping as if they had just witnessed history. Simon stood up, shaking his head in amazement, and whispered, "That was unbelievable." The host ran on stage, tears in her eyes, and said, "Marco, that was beautiful. You just moved everyone in this room." Another judge asked, "Who taught you to sing like that?" Marco smiled nervously and replied, "No one. I just sing what I feel." The cameras zoomed in on his face, capturing the innocence and sincerity that made millions fall in love with him later that night when the performance went viral online. Within hours, social media was flooded with comments like, "He sounds exactly like Freddie Aguilar." And, "Could he be related?" People started comparing old videos of Freddie with Marco's audition, noticing the striking resemblance in their voices and even their mannerisms. The next morning, Marco woke up to hundreds of missed calls and messages. His life had changed overnight. Reporters camped outside his small hostel, wanting to know everything about the mysterious son of Freddie Aguilar. Back home, his mother, Liza, sat quietly watching her son's video on TV, tears rolling down her cheeks. She knew the truth could no longer stay hidden. That afternoon, producers from the show reached out to Freddie Aguilar himself, asking if he had seen the performance. Freddie watched the clip in silence, his eyes glistening. He didn't need a DNA test to know the truth, he could feel it in every note Marco sang. "That's my blood," he whispered. Days later, during the semi-finals, the producers arranged a surprise meeting backstage. Marco sat nervously in his dressing room, waiting for his cue, when the door opened quietly. Standing there was Freddie Aguilar, older, with kind, tired eyes and a gentle smile. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was filled with the weight of years lost and words unspoken. Finally, Freddie said softly, "You have my voice." Marco stood up, struggling to speak. "In your song," he whispered. The two men embraced, and tears streamed down both their faces. It wasn't a perfect reunion, too many years had passed for that, but it was real, and it was healing. Later that night, Marco took the stage again. The audience didn't know what had just happened behind the scenes, but they could feel something powerful in the air. He sang another song, not to impress, but to express. His performance carried the warmth of reconciliation and the strength of truth. Freddie watched from the audience, quietly wiping his eyes as his son sang under the same lights he once did decades ago. When the music ended, the crowd stood once more, cheering louder than before. Simon Cowell looked at Marco and said, "I don't think I've ever seen a story like yours. You didn't just sing tonight, you connected generations." Marco smiled humbly, knowing this was only the beginning. He had found his father, his voice, and his purpose, all through one song. The night of the Philippines Got Talent grand finals arrived like a dream Marco never wanted to end. The stadium was packed, every seat filled with fans holding banners that read, "Marco Santos, the voice of the people." The cameras swept across the crowd, capturing faces of anticipation and emotion. Backstage, Marco held his father's old guitar close to his chest, his heart pounding. Freddie Aguilar, now seated in the front row beside the judges, gave him a quiet nod of encouragement. "This is your time, son," he whispered earlier, his voice trembling with pride. For Marco, this performance wasn't about winning anymore. It was about telling the world who he truly was, a child of music, born from love, struggle, and destiny. As the lights dimmed, Marco walked out slowly, the audience falling silent. He sat on a stool in the center of the stage, the spotlight glowing softly around him. The host announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Marco Santos with an original song titled, Anak ng Musika." The first few chords rang out, warm and nostalgic, like a conversation between past and present. His voice began low and gentle, each lyric telling a story of a boy who grew up without a father but found strength in his songs. As the melody swelled, the emotion in his voice deepened. It was as if every wound, every question, and every moment of longing was being transformed into music. When the camera cut to Freddie, his eyes were filled with tears. He wasn't just watching a performance, he was witnessing redemption. The judges, including Simon Cowell, were visibly moved. Simon leaned forward, elbows on the table, completely captivated. As Marco reached the chorus, he sang about the power of forgiveness, how music heals what time cannot, and how love always finds its way back, no matter how long it takes. The crowd began waving their lights, creating a sea of twinkling stars inside the arena. By the time Marco sang the final line, his voice cracked with emotion, and the entire audience was already on its feet. For a few seconds, there was pure silence, the kind of silence that only comes after something truly unforgettable. Then the cheers erupted like thunder. Simon stood, clapping slowly before saying, "That wasn't just a song, that was a lifetime poured into music. I'm honored to have witnessed this." Another judge wiped away tears, saying, "You reminded us what music is supposed to do, touch hearts." Freddie walked up on stage, hugged his son tightly, and whispered into his ear, "You've done what I never could, you healed the world with our story." When the winner was announced later that night, it came as no surprise. Marco Santos, the hidden son of Freddie Aguilar, had won Philippines Got Talent, with the highest vote count in the show's history. Confetti fell from the ceiling, golden lights shone down, and for the first time, father and son stood side by side on stage, united by music. Months after his victory, Marco's life changed forever. International producers began calling, interviews flooded in, and he was invited to perform on global stages. The moment that would define the next chapter of his journey came when he received an invitation to perform on America's Got Talent, The Champions. It was a full-circle moment. Simon Cowell, the man who first believed in his gift, would be judging again. When Marco stepped on that world-famous stage, he felt both nervous and grateful. The audience recognized him immediately, clapping before he even began. Simon smiled and said, "Last time, you shocked the world. Tonight, inspire it." Marco took a deep breath and began to sing a new song called Bridge of Voices, a heartfelt English-Filipino piece he wrote about uniting cultures and generations through music. His voice carried across the theater, blending both tradition and modern soul. The crowd was entranced. Every lyric spoke about his journey from the streets of the Philippines to the global stage, from a boy searching for his father to a man who found his purpose. As he sang the final verse, he looked up, tears glimmering under the lights, and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." The audience rose in a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Simon Cowell, moved beyond words, simply said, "This is why music exists, to connect souls like yours." After the show, Marco returned home to his small town, where he built a music school for children who couldn't afford lessons. He named it, The House of Anak, a tribute to the song that started it all. Standing on that same street corner where he once sang for coins, he smiled as he heard the laughter and music of children echoing in the distance. The boy who once hid his name had become a symbol of hope, proving that no matter where you come from, your voice can change the world.